On August 2nd, 1939, just before the beginning of World War II, Albert Einstein wrote to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, because of the efforts in Nazi Germany to purify uranium-235, which could be used to build an atomic bomb. It was shortly after that the government began a serious undertaking known only as the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was committed to expanding research that would help create the atomic bomb. Through their research, they found that no ordinary extraction method could separate the two isotopes of uranium. A massive enrichment laboratory/power plant was constructed at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Harold Urey and his colleagues at Columbia University developed a system to extract the uranium needed. Once all the many steps had been completed, they were able to test the concept behind the atomic fusion, splitting the atom. From 1939 to 1945, more than $2 billion was spent on the Manhattan Project. This project created the formulas for refining uranium and putting together a working atomic bomb. They were created by some of the greatest minds of our time. The leader among them was Robert Oppenheimer, who oversaw the project from beginning to end. Finally, the day came when everyone at Los Alamos would find out if the gadget was going to be the colossal failure of the century, or perhaps the end to the war. It came down to the morning of July 16th, 1945. A brilliant flash from the bottom of the Gemini's Mountains in northern New Mexico brought the atomic age. The light from the explosion turned orange as the atomic fireball began shooting upwards. The sky turned red and it pulsed as it cooled. The mushroom cloud of radioactive vapor exploded in the sky. Beneath the cloud, all that remained of the soil of the blast site were fragments of jade-green radioactive glass created by the heat of the reaction. The brilliant light from the explosion showed with such intensity that the residents from a distant community would swear that the sun came up twice that day. After witnessing the explosion, the scientists had mixed reactions.
There was a group of scientists from the University of Chicago who were working on the Manhattan Project, and after the first test, they actually were arguing that we shouldn't actually use the two weapons that we had made, because they felt like just testing this thing in a way that was public enough that people could know what we could do would be good enough. And so, that was a sizable faction of the scientists working on this who felt that way. And of course, they don't get mentioned because it would be it's a cleaner story with the way they tell it.
Isidore Rabi felt that the balance of nature had been upset, as if humankind had become a threat to the world. Robert Oppenheimer, even though he was ecstatic about the success of the project, said, a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." Ken Bainbridge, the test director, told Oppenheimer, "Now we're all sons of bitches." After viewing the results of their tests, several participants signed petitions against losing the monster they had created, but that was not how it happened. The desert of New Mexico would not be the last place on planet Earth to experience an atomic explosion.
The Skinless Throng, excerpt by Yamamoto Yasuo. In the big shelter at the foot of Mount Hiji, a skinless throng, looking up, or lying face down, or sitting with legs crossed, were crying, "Give me water." Their spasmodic cries and groans filled the air raid shelter from the farthest dark corner to the exit, like a huge musical instrument. They resounded, making a ghastly howl. They probably all died, cursing mankind's brutality, called war.
When Harry Truman heard of the success of the Manhattan Project, he knew he was put with a choice of wisdom. The ability to end the war with Japan was in his hands, but it would involve unleashing the most terrible weapon ever known. The American soldiers and civilians were very weak 4 years of war. Yet the Japanese military were refusing to give up the fight. American forces had Okinawa and Iwo Jima and were intensely firebombing Japanese cities, but Japan had an army of 2 million strong positioned soldiers in the home islands guarding against invasion. For Truman, the choice whether or not to use the atomic bomb was the most difficult decision of his life. The first Allied demand for an immediate surrender was made to the leadership of Japan, although demands said that refusal would result in total destruction. No mention of any new weapons of mass destruction was made. Japanese military command rejected the request for surrender, but there were indications that the surrender was possible. Regardless, on August 6, 1945, a plane called the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. 70,000 Japanese people were killed. In the months and years that followed, another 100,000 died from burns and radiation sickness. On August 14, 1945, the Japanese surrendered because the Emperor of Japan could not risk any more lives of his people. I think the United States was right in making the atomic bomb. This was something the world needed to know, but it's complicated. I think that the research should not be widely known because of the damage it caused. I think that it was not right to drop the bombs on Japan. It was one of the most hardest decisions in President Truman's life. If I was in that position, I don't know what I'd do. I feel that any country has no sovereign rights to develop nuclear weapons. The reason being that if one country launches it, then it's the end of the world. Other countries will launch their bombs in retaliation, causing nuclear war.
Possesses the most nuclear weapons of any country in the world. However, and we believe in terms of protecting the U.S. interests that there are certain countries that we don't want to have nuclear weapons. However, that's the perspective of someone who works in the United States nuclear security industry. If you were to ask people who live in other countries, they would probably have very different opinions on that subject because it's extremely controversial, and many people in the world question why the United States thinks it's okay for us to have a huge nuclear weapons stockpile while not allowing other countries to develop those same technologies and create those same options for their policy making.
Mm-hmm. I feel that the rights to develop the atomic bomb are both the same and different for the United States than other countries. On one hand, if we hadn't made the bomb in the first place, then more lives would have been lost in World War II and would have taken longer and farther in fighting. On the other hand, if we hadn't done it, then we wouldn't have been in the point where countries are standing opposite each other in fear of launching a nuclear weapon in the retaliation. There's no way to win that war. I think the responsibility that scientists have for the outcome of their research and development of weapons is to keep the science alive, but to keep it secret. They should keep it secret because if we didn't, then other countries would want to steal the technology and research to use against us and others.
As to whether or not the United States' role and responsibilities and rights are different compared to others, that's also an interesting question. I mean, we were the ones who figured this out in the first place and built the first one, and there are a lot of people who think that makes us sort of more responsible for, basically tending to this kind of technology and shepherding it through, through the world.
The responsibility that governments have in the outcome of their research and development of weapons is that they have a responsibility to make the world safe from the bombs falling into the wrong hands. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.